Welcome to the SBCA podcast, Component Connection, where we explore the people, ideas, trends, and innovations shaping the market and the future of structural building components. Whether you're on the shop floor, in the office, in the yard, or out in the field, we're glad you're here.
Welcome back to Component Connection, the podcast from the Structural Building Components Association. I'm Abby Langenberg, SBCA's Director of Business Development. In this episode, we are recapping our recent trip to Washington, D.C. for our legislative fly-in and our open quarterly meeting. From great conversations on Capitol Hill to important updates from our board meeting, there's a lot to cover here. So joining me again to break it all down is SBCA's Executive Director, Jess Lohse. Welcome.
Hey, great to be back. Let's talk about the OQM.
Yeah. So let's start with the big picture recap. What were the main takeaways from the OQM and the legislative fly-in this year?
I think whirlwind is probably, I don't know if that's one word or two words, but that is a really good description of everything that went on. We had a lot of things happen in that week on Capitol Hill in our kind of education day when we brought in some speakers, as well as a very busy and productive board meeting.
That's awesome. So for those people who have never attended a fly-in or an OQM, what does that experience look like and feel like once you kind of get there and all of it starts?
So, I look back, I'm almost 20 years into my SBCA experience. So thinking back to when I was first coming to the OQMs and even the first fly-in, I think I only did one or two as a, component manufacturer. It can be intimidating. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of people that know a lot of different things. And maybe to, start with the fly-in, it's tough to go to Washington, D.C. There's a lot of things going on. It's a busy place. Everybody wants something. I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing, but it's a very transactional town. And that's just being realistic and being honest about it. And obviously with component manufacturers or our members going to the Hill, yes, we do want something. We're asking for something and we want to be recognized and that kind of stuff. But really, my takeaway from that part of it was the lawmakers and their staff this time, more than any time, it seemed like they wanted information from us and felt as though we were probably in a place to provide them information to better use to try to help housing in some way, shape, or form. As far as the OQM, that's, again, there's a lot of people there. We are attracting really high numbers here in recent years. So you think of anywhere from maybe 80 to 120, maybe 150 people in a room. And it's hard to kind of stand out and kind of, know when to peek out of the turtle shell and raise your voice. But it is one of those that we are welcoming. We do want that, whether it's a new perspective or just people to kind of be themselves. And, not everybody's going to say the right things. And, there might be a couple jokes or, things that happen as a result. But all in all, it's very welcoming. It takes a little bit to find your place in the group and who your buddies are going to be that you sit next to. But on the flip side of that, I see lifelong relationships and friendships that if you're going to be committed to going to the SBCA OQMs, you're going to see people 2-3 times a year. And that's more than I see a lot of my friends that A, live in the same town, or B, I went to high school or college with. So it's a great way to establish relationships. And who else, it's kind of that misery loves company. If things are rough in your neighborhood for trust market, it's probably rough in theirs as well. So, and the good times are good too. So it's one of those to where you can really establish some relationships, and it just gets kind of out of that comfort zone of coming to the meetings. And then once you start doing that, we see a lot of people just keep coming back because it is so valuable and great way to work on your business for a few days while getting out of the business at the same time. But, it's not exactly a vacation either. So,
yeah. So let's jump a little bit more into the OQM. So this OQM was a little bit different than our previous ones, where it included quite a speaker lineup that we haven't seen before. So what were some of those standout sessions or the moments that resonated with you during that kind of shakeup for our OQM?
Yeah, so Washington, D.C. offers a huge opportunity for a lot of different people to come in and talk. just because of who was there, who's local to DC. And, it was one of those where let's throw a lot of spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. Well, a lot of it ended up sticking. And DC being what it is, schedules change, a vote on this on the Hill, or this person got called away. And I don't take that personally. Hopefully nobody else does either. But it was one of those where schedules needed to be fluid. Our staff did a great job of monitoring and managing that as things did need to change. I haven't heard of anybody say that, it looked unorganized, because A, it wasn't, but B, it was one of those, we just needed to trust the process of being able to do things last minute and get going there. But as far as sessions, there were a lot of great ones. Ed Hudson with Home Innovation Research Lab. I wish he could read me bedtime stories. He is, he talks about trust market share and components and, not that we're going to rest on these laurels, but things are good for components compared to other alternatives. And that's something I want to continue to build on, and it's motivating, but it does make you feel pretty good. And like, okay, we are in the right space. We've got the right products. We're meeting the demand of the builders. And so his session, not only on where we have been in the past, market share type stuff, but also builder sentiment data. And those are two different surveys that Home Innovation Research Lab puts out. The builder sentiment really says, okay, this is where we're going. Asking questions like, are you more likely to use trusses in the next few years? Well, that is overwhelmingly yes. So that's one of those that either the same or more bodes well for our manufacturers. And it really gives you an understanding of where things are at. It's easy to get sucked in on LinkedIn on some alternatives, whether it's 3D printing or, I don't want to disparage any of the other alternatives, but they post a lot about their solutions. And just because it's being posted and talked about doesn't necessarily mean that's the reality. So I caution people about that coming back to the norm, which is structural building components, the trusses, the floor trusses, wall panels, that is the best pathway forward, especially in my mind, after listening to people like Ed. Beyond that, John with HUD, John Gibbs, and he's got the longest title, I think. Well, probably not the longest one I've had to talk about, but he's in the development and research as an undersecretary at HUD. He had a lot of good things to say, very complimentary of our past efforts in the Innovative Housing Showcase. So it was interesting to hear from him. Representative Stanton, a sitting U.S. congressman, was there to talk a little bit about immigration. And he's, got some different opinions than what a lot of people in the room have. But I also had people come up to me afterwards and say, I welcome that. I was happy to hear from somebody different. It's not just an echo chamber. And that's what I'm most proud of with our staff and the lineup that we put together, is this is the reality of situations. We've got people that are on both sides of issues. Let's hear from them. We, as an organization, largely have to be like Switzerland. We need to be able to go out and work with anybody if we're going to really progress housing and make sure that we are driving, affordability and the use of components and doing things better. As we say, the best way to frame, we need to continue to drive that forward. Beyond that, we had some people with some Southern Yellow Pine, Allison Coughlin, the CME, and Mike Wazewski did a great job breaking down futures contracts and how to work that. And it really, it's like a risk management tool for our members. We had some people in from Marsh McLennan Agency to talk about some insurance options that we have. And I need to check my list to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Oh, we also had a lobbyist from NHB, Alex Strong, which was great because NHB has, I was at their meetings this week, and I think they are like top 5 of most influential bodies in Congress, for their efforts. And it's one to, yes, we could, attach our cart to their horse or however that saying should go. But I think there's some differences there where they're more worried about the totality of it and land developments and regulation, where we're very much worried about labor, tariffs. There's some overlap, but, it was interesting to hear from NHB's perspective on what they worked on a week after we were in DC and, get those perspectives. But again, we don't always align 100% of the time, but we're probably 98, maybe 97. But I still think it's important for us to have our own voice and being able to, articulate our member behalf as opposed to trying to route it through another organization that is significantly larger. And we might not be able to have as quality or as loud of a voice within that if we were to go with that approach.
Yeah. So what are we looking at as we look towards future OQMs? And with this little shakeup that we had in the middle, what can future attendees expect from our OQM meetings? Did you get good feedback on this change for OQMs? And kind of what are we thinking for that format moving forward?
First and foremost, we're always looking to improve. I mean, it's a continuous improvement because the events are never, summarize it in just like a sentence, it's like to expect the unexpected. But it's easy to think that we get a formula and just repeat it year after year. That becomes a little stale. So it's one of those that I think we figured out this is another tool in our toolbox. And now not every tool is appropriate for every location or every job or every OQM. It is one of those that, okay, the rapid fire, keeping people's attention, really hitting them from all kinds of different angles. People were energized by that, but that isn't necessarily going to work when we go to somewhere that is a little bit more out of the way and we just don't have that many speakers to choose from. So I think it's one of those that each one needs to be its own separately programmed event, but know that you're going to be getting something a little bit different each time. We want to make sure that we've got balance with networking events, making sure that the attendees can talk to one another, because that's where a lot of the value comes from. We also need to make sure that we're updating, us as staff, the membership and the people that attend with what we're working on, what we're doing, because you don't want to get too far away from that. You also want to have some education pieces in it with that. And then let's balance it with some fun and team building and the business of the association. So there's a lot that we try to balance, but the more OQMs we do, the more I tend to understand that each one of them needs to be a little bit unique for its own sake. And it's just not, oh, that worked last time, let's do that over and over. Because pretty soon it's not going to work and then people aren't going to be wanting to attend that event.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful. And I think a lot of people can relate to not wanting to do the same thing every single time and enjoying that little bit of change up in their routine. So looking at the board meeting that happened in DC, what were some of those important decisions that were made at the board meeting that you can give us a quick update or rundown for anybody that kind of missed the behind the scenes for the board meeting?
So, the coolest thing that happens is when our board members either are reelected or new board members come on. So that's always one that I like to watch because that's an important deal. It's a huge deal to be a board member on a national trade association. I remember when I kind of became involved with that it was very important to me. And I'm very proud of, that involvement, especially where I was at in my career back then. But it opened up so many different opportunities. And obviously I ended up here now. But it is one of those that along the way and just the relationships and kind of the realization that you are a leader of an industry when you step onto that board of directors. So really, renewals are very important. We had Josh Hendrickson, Paul Johnson, and Justin Richardson re-up for another 3 years. We had to say goodbye to one, Mike Callahan with Cinco. He reached a kind of a term limit situation. I don't think he's going to go too terribly far. I'll look forward to seeing him at BCMC. But we also added a few board members too, which is great, where we're trying to keep balance, both in geography, size of organization, and then obviously we've got component manufacturers. But a unique part of our board is we allow suppliers to participate. We also allow our framers to participate. So we did end up adding another supplier member, David Reed with Kyocera Cinco, so kind of replacing Mike's spot there. But we also added some component manufacturers, Zach Shepard with engineering building design. When his name came up, people are like, he hasn't been on the board because he's done so many different things. He's been so active with whether it's BCMC or education. Like he's just one of those go get 'em type people and really just whatever the need is, he's there. Daryl Mass with Midland Trust. It's been great to get to know him and under, that perspective. He's, I believe, out of South Carolina. So that's awesome to have him on the board. And then Steve Broadbent from SunPro out of Utah. I've known him for a number of years. And I think we met at a Do It Best show to where when I don't know if I was on staff with SBCA at the time or something, but we did kind of like just an intro to the Do It Best membership about what SBCA was. And that paid dividends because Steve is a very bright person. I'm looking forward to his insights on the board. So that's, probably first and foremost. Beyond that, we had some updates. We've been working on a concept where we're trying to bring architects, engineers, plan designers, code officials, maybe even builders together in like a 1 or 2 day event. And we're calling that component craft because we want to locate it at microbreweries for an educational, hence the craft brewing tie-in, plus kind of reward for, listening to talk about components all day. You get maybe a cool one at the end. But it is one of those that we talked a lot about that. We also talked about a political action committee and where SBCA moves with that for the next, few I don't know, it might happen quick, might take some time, but what are our next steps in that avenue? So there was a lot of discussion there, and really, and there's some budget items too that are always attended to at board meetings. And so some business, but some really cool stuff came out of it as well.
So we are going to hop over to the legislative fly-in. You mentioned being surprised about how welcoming everybody was and the lawmakers and staff that you guys met with. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and what changed your perspective, or if it changed your perspective on advocacy efforts?
So it's going to DC, it's easy to feel overwhelmed for some of the things I already talked about here, but it is one of those where it's a very unique town, but it is one of those, you walk into those meetings and you feel like you might be at a deficit for knowledge, but for very specific topics, you can actually become the expert for them, whether it's a lawmaker or their aides or their staff, to learn from. So if they're learning from you, that puts you in a different position. I felt like every meeting I was in, which is a good thing, but hopefully our other members that were there and attending felt the same way, that they had a surplus of information to share. And when it comes to housing, it's obviously a hot button issue. It has inflationary effects. It has just quality of life effects for people in every corner of this country. There's a deep need for housing, but affordable housing is kind of the other point. But it's one of those to where from now compared to when I had done it in the past, it's more at the forefront and they can't ignore it. So it's one of those to where they are taking the meetings. They're curious about it. They want to hear from our perspectives because we have a very unique value proposition. We are able to, you look at the Framing the American Dream data, we're able to frame much more efficiently than what the standard operating procedures are for a lot of stick framers. So that's where we come in and like, hey, we have a solution. We just need to be a little bit more articulate, a little louder with our voice about, using that solution. So that's really where it comes from for me is, it felt different because we were in a much better position, that we had knowledge and information that for a problem they are trying to solve.
Yeah. So how many meetings did we have during the fly-in, and how many were actual lawmakers that you guys met with?
So I'm going to defer to Christine, but I think her numbers were like 20, maybe a little over 20 meetings and actual like 10 lawmakers that we interacted with directly. And, sometimes the right staff person might be the better fit, but, the lawmakers, nonetheless, it's always cool to, talk with the senator, talk with the congressperson. It's pretty neat. Like I'm one of the ones I met with, the senator last week. He was on my flight home yesterday out of DC wearing his John Deere cap and trying to sneak onto the plane, which that's hard to do because it's single file, and that's just the way it was. But it's pretty cool to be able to do those things and know that you can have access, you can participate in the system. And yes, it's okay you don't have to love it, but you should like it and you should participate in it because it's the system we have. And that's where, if you're just going to reject it, well, there's not many alternatives. And that's where you can have some problems, if you're not participating.
Yeah. What makes it more valuable, or maybe a different value of meeting directly with lawmakers or their staff rather than doing, say, like an email campaign or a letter campaign?
Well, it's a great question because it's easy to think, oh, I can just send an email. Well, I've probably got a couple hundred emails today, and, there's maybe a small percentage that I'm really going to spend a lot of time with. But it's one of those to where in-person meetings, and that's why I think I'm a big fan of in-person meetings. It's hard to go to, they're expensive, it's taking time away, you've got a lot to do when you come back. But whether it's an OQM or meeting with a lawmaker, it's that personal connection. And that's what's going to trigger the memory. And that's what's going to be something that they, get triggered on in the future sometime when they're trying to deal with that. And that's the impression that you can make, the information you can impart on them. It's one thing to read it, but are they really paying attention to it? But if you're having a conversation and you are actively listening and they are actively listening, you're back and forth, that's where I think you make the impressions, and the impressions add up to what actions they will ultimately take. Now, they might not do exactly what you want, which is, human nature, but it is one of those that, okay, if we're going to have our say, let's present up face to face. Let's make sure that we're putting our best foot forward. And hopefully we're able to, make it a little bit easier to build components or make sure that we're not put at a deficit to another product or solution.
So when we are looking at long-term for advocacy, what is the long-term goal for our fly-in efforts? And do you see this expanding or evolving in future years?
I think the consensus I'm feeling from our board, our exec, the people that participated, is that we need to have a presence. We need to be there. And I'm on board with that, not because I absolutely love DC, but it's one of those to where things can happen to you or you can happen to the things, meaning that if we don't participate, if we don't have some presence there, and there's a potential for components to be put in a worse place than we currently are. Those things can happen in the building code too, but it's one of those through legislation. If we're put at a disadvantage, that isn't serving our industry. It's not serving our association and our members. We need to be on the cusp of what is happening. And if we can kind of sweeten the pot to where we can put some incentives to use components in place, that's a huge victory. But it is one of those like, okay, let's not do any harm, to our industry. Let's participate, make sure that we've got a voice there. And that's going to take consistency. It's, seldom are deals done in a single meeting, especially a DC, any of that. But it is one of those where we're going to have a consistent presence, and we're going to have to be very thoughtful and strategic about it and make sure that, we have that voice when we need it. Now, right now we had a perfect storm of hot button issues between immigration and tariffs and all the change that is happening, combined with, rates are not where we want it to be, so that is tamping down demand. So it's one of those to where we've got some, a lot of issues coming together at once. So we had a lot of interest. Now you can go back just a few years, like, oh, everything's great. And, during the COVID boom of housing, like, oh yeah, everything was awesome. But those things don't always last. So it's one of those that if we're just really going to have to invest the time and the energy and the money to be able to go in and, have some sort of a presence there to where when we need something, hopefully we've got it, somebody that recognizes us and we can make that ask, as opposed to just trying to spin up, on a moment's notice when something does happen, like the immigration or the tariff issues that we're dealing with today.
Yeah, the investment. I think that's a really great segue into the formation or possible formation of a PAC and what that would look like for our industry and kind of why it's being considered right now.
Yeah, so PAC, a political action committee, and again, I am not in love with how things get done, but we have to participate with what we've got to work with. And that's really having a lot of conversations. I've probably had a dozen, maybe even 24 conversations with people that are more familiar with PACs, and I've really educated myself. It's kind of the buying the ticket to get in to see the event or to participate. And that's where it's not huge dollar amounts that are going to go to any one candidate or need to come from any one individual. And there's a lot of guidelines on, what restrictions are possible. It's not a super PAC. It's a PAC that really is to drive some influence and to be able to have a voice. And yes, it takes a lot to, develop a PAC, put into it, and then contribute those funds. But every year it gets more and more expensive to have an election if you're going to run for office. And that's what those people need. And they recognize that. And that's something they will pay attention to. It's essentially their scorecard of like, oh, okay, these folks want to, help me out. Then I, in return, will help them out. It's one of those to where we did a great job leveraging our relationships as an association between our members, our staff, and having people, to speak to us. That isn't sustainable. However, if we're going to want to have an audience with those folks, that's where the PAC comes in to help us do that. And we're talking thousands of dollars, not tens of thousands, not, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It is one of those where it's going to be an investment for our members and really to help, drive those things forward. So when we want to have a speaker at an event, they'll pick up the phone and it'll be a phone call, not like 50 email asks and back and forth. So it seems like if we're wanting to have more responsiveness out of the lawmakers in DC, that PAC is the way forward with that. And again, this is one where I'm treading lightly just because I want to make sure it's on our membership's radar and we're not, gung-ho going down the road without them being able to say, hey, let's stop and check the air pressure on the tires or the oil or whatever else we need to make sure that we're doing the right thing on our journey here. But it is one that, most things point to that direction. It's not going to be huge. It's just going to be one of those things that allows us to, have the conversations when we need to have them. And all of our efforts, I've alluded to this in a few conversations. It's not like we're going to have the big, beautiful trust bill that we get signed and, our president of the association's next to the president of the United States, at the signing. We're really looking at like one line in a bill, whether it's in or out, really just try to have a little bit of like, okay, this would really harm us or this would really help us. Please, take corresponding action. That I think is a realistic strategy that we can achieve. And given, the ramp up in the advocacy here in the last several weeks, a few months, I think that's achievable for us as long as we keep our strategy, pure and on point, as well as, our expectations real. I like that approach, but it is one of those that we're still in that exploratory. We've kind of got a mandate from the people in attendance last week to go out and do some things and figure it out. And then we'll pull the trigger with the board here shortly if that's what they decide to do.
I think that's great. So one last one as we wrap up. Why is it important for members to engage in these advocacy and leadership opportunities as we move forward?
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to that. I would rather go down swinging than get called out on strikes. And that, things can happen to you if you're not watching and paying attention. And that can happen to our industry. We could be put at a disadvantage. And things like that have happened in the past. And, we tried as an association and, I'm not going to guarantee success, but I would guarantee our effort will be there, as well as our attitude and making sure that we're able to approach with being able to try to get something done. So we can't guarantee the outcome, but we can, participate. Otherwise, if you're just there and you let it happen to you, you're not at as much fault, but it is one of those that your non-participation was participation in the process. And I would rather, like I said, go down swinging to use that cliche, but that is one of those that I think having a presence is the best way and make sure that we're on top of things. And to, again, Congress is motivated to try to do something about housing. Now they can, Google housing easy button and something's going to pop up. It's probably not the easiest solution, not the best solution. And that's where we need to position our products, our processes, and our people in a position to where we are the best solution. And I truly believe that. That's what makes my job so easy is really components are the best way to frame. And, if we want to improve housing, that's the pathway forward. It does so many different things. We are in every market. I mean, probably on my stump speech here about yay components, but if you made it this far in it, you probably agree with me. But all in all, it's one of those that I think the participation needs to happen actively as opposed to passively.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining today and giving us a rundown on all the advocacy efforts and the DC OQM. And we will see you guys next time.
Yeah, thanks for listening and thanks for participating.
Thanks for listening to Component Connection, brought to you by SBCA. If there's a topic you'd like us to explore in a future episode, email us at podcast@sbcacomponents.com. Until next time, stay connected.